This is the first in a series of workshops covering our new AI tooling at Cloudflare and also looking at how our tooling, not just our AI stuff, but a lot of our developer focused tools like Workers, our serverless platform, R2 or Blob storage, and all kinds of other tools can integrate with AI tools that are out there from other places. So, for instance, LangChain is a really popular open source tool for building more complex AI-based applications. And in a later workshop, we'll cover how you can use that with some of the tools that we have in the Cloudflare ecosystem. This workshop in particular is a very high-level look at some of the fundamental concepts of building with AI tools today. So doing, I guess, what you could call AI development, like how do I use large language models? How do I use vector databases? All this stuff in my work as a developer day to day. So hopefully you find this interesting and useful, and hopefully you'll stick around for the other workshops, which will all be live coding some of these concepts. So my name is Christian, Christian Freeman. You can find me on Twitter at ChristianF_. You can also email me if you have any questions. My email is just christian@cloudflare.com. So if anything comes up after the fact, or maybe you go and play with some of these tools and have issues, you can always reach out to me on Twitter or via email, and I'm happy to answer any questions as they come up. So I'm a developer advocate at Cloudflare. I've been here for probably four-ish years, 4.5 years now. I began work as a developer advocate focused on writing tutorials for Cloudflare Workers, our serverless platform. And as we've launched new AI tooling, I've kind of shifted focus into focusing on AI development. So whether that's using all of our Workers AI tools or integrating Workers and Cloudflare Pages or some of our database stuff with tools like ChatGPT or LangChain. That's kind of my focus at Cloudflare day to day. I also make a lot of videos and free courses. So you probably noticed I got like the fancy mic and camera, and I do try to make use of it at 7dev. So links.7.dev. 7dev is like my Instagram and YouTube channel where I do a lot of stuff on AI, but also all kinds of general web development stuff. So if you enjoy my teaching style and you want to see more stuff from me, you can check that out at that URL. Okay, so let's talk about the schedule today. We have about an hour to get through these concepts. Hopefully, we'll have some time to look at some bonus new stuff that we've launched recently that I wanted to kind of shout out since it's not on the schedule of further workshops, though obviously we could do some follow-up webinars and stuff if people are interested. So to start, we're going to introduce this workshop series and talk a little bit about what the content of some of the later workshops are going to be here over the next couple of weeks. So if you are interested in the things we talk about today and you want to get some more hands-on experience with that stuff, you'll get a sneak peek at what we'll be doing here in the next couple of weeks. Then we'll look at models. So we'll begin by talking about some of the models that are available for you to work with as an AI developer, particularly focused on the things that we have available at Cloudflare under the Workers AI product suite. And then we'll cover embeddings and vector databases. These are pretty related. And a lot of the more intermediate stuff that you'll build with AI tools will make use of either embeddings or vector databases. And I hopefully will do a good job explaining, though obviously let me know if you have questions or anything like that. I'll do a good job, hopefully, explaining what those things are, how those concepts work, and how you can get started with them using tools like Workers AI and Vectorize. We'll also look with how to work with models. This is going to be kind of a sneak peek at some of the practical stuff that we'll be doing in the further workshops. So when we do live coding and we actually start to work with these models, what does that actually mean? How does that work? That's what we'll be doing or looking at the end of the talk. And then, like I said, finally, if we have some time, depending on how much time it takes for me to get through the slides, as well as any questions that may come up, I wanted to share a couple new things that I think are really cool that we have at Cloudflare for doing AI stuff. And I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So before we jump into it, I'll just check questions. Okay, so more questions on being able to hear. I think we know that the sound is working. So yeah, check your audio output. Nilesh says, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you as well. And thanks to everyone that is attending. And then last question is the recording of the workshop going to be uploaded? So yes, we are recording this and we'll make it available for people to rewatch. So if you didn't sign up for the webinar using the link, like our webinar kind of landing page, make sure you go and do that, and you'll get an email with the link to the recorded webinar once it's done. So great question. Okay, so yeah, so let's jump into the schedule real quick, and then we'll get talking about actual AI stuff. So today we're looking at embeddings, models, and vector databases 101. So obviously that's today, and thanks so much for attending. Next Thursday, a week from today, we'll be looking at building applications with Llama and Workers AI. So Llama is a very popular open source large language model that we have support for in Workers AI. And we'll be looking at how to build applications like a chatbot using Llama. So you can do it all. You kind of own your entire AI stack, right? Instead of needing to go use ChatGPT or maybe an Azure large language model or any of that kind of stuff. You can use Llama and deploy it and sort of tweak the prompts and all that stuff yourself. And so that's what we'll be doing on Thursday. On Friday, like literally the next day, it's going to be a packed week next week. We'll be looking at how to build a RAG application, which is a retrieval augmented generation. Is that what it is? I have to go and look at the thing. I'm like way deep in slides. So building a RAG application with Vectorize and Workers AI. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, so you can get a teaser of why this stuff matters. I would say my opinion on AI stuff is that RAG applications are kind of like the hello world for AI developers. And so understanding how that works and being able to build one is pretty valuable and really useful. So I'll show you how to do that. And then the following Thursday, we'll look at optimizing existing AI applications with Cloudflare. So we have a bunch of tooling that you can use for your existing AI applications. Say, for instance, you're using LangChain to build a more complex AI application that sort of ties together a bunch of different providers or anything like that. Or you're using ChatGPT and you want to allow sort of multi-provider, access and use something like AI Gateway, which is a product we have here. We'll cover all of that stuff in that webinar. Okay, you just answering questions again real quick before I dive into stuff. Yes, so it is recorded, and we will make it available to people after the webinar ends. Good question. Okay, so obviously, the focus of these workshops is we're going to be covering AI development, and I think that term is kind of confusing. I guess what I mean by AI development is actually like taking large language models or vector databases or embeddings and building interesting stuff with them. So maybe you're building like a chatbot for someone who's working in a professional setting. Maybe it's like a chatbot that helps analyze PDFs or something like that. It's not in this case, developing new models or stuff like that. It's going to be how do we take this whole new ecosystem of interesting tools and build cool stuff with it. Obviously, we're going to be focusing, though not entirely focused, but we're going to sort of orient ourselves towards some of the new tooling that we've launched at Cloudflare, things like Workers AI and Vectorize, as well as looking at how we'll use tools like Workers, our serverless platform, and R2, our blob storage, to kind of augment the stuff we want to build using these tools. So first, I want to just quickly, I've kind of mentioned them, but I want to just go kind of blow by blow. What are all the things that we've launched? Because we have launched a lot of things recently. And you might be familiar with Cloudflare, from stuff like DNS and firewall security stuff, but we actually do have a pretty robust set of AI tooling now that is really easy to work with and get started with. So I just wanted to kind of recap all of that. The first thing, and really what we'll be focusing a lot of our time in these webinars on, is Workers AI. So basically what this is it's quick access to a variety of useful AI models. This is not the complete list. It's just sort of a short version here, but things like language models, so Llama or Mistral, which are both open source large language models that are similar to if you have not a ton of experience with language models when stuff that's out there. Obviously, we'll cover that here shortly. But this is like things that are similar to GPT. So things that allow you to sort of ask a question or give it some text and have it return text back to you, text inference and stuff like that. We also have embeddings, another thing we'll cover today, the ability to generate embeddings based on some data. And finally, something that's pretty new. Well, not finally, there's actually a number of other things on here, things like translations and image classification and all kinds of other stuff that we'll look at a little later. But this is sort of the high level. You can also do image generation. So that's a new thing that launched, I think, either on Thanksgiving or like right around Thanksgiving. So that's last week. And so now you can use the Stable Diffusion model to generate images directly inside of Workers AI. So that's something that we launched recently as well. If you go to ai.cloudflare.com, you can go and poke around at that as I keep talking. My feelings won't be hurt. It's okay. There's a lot of cool stuff there for sort of exploring the different models. You can actually play around with a lot of them just right in your browser. So you can see how these models work and what you can do with them right from that landing page, which is great. Vectorize is our vector database that we'll be talking about in some detail today that is deployed on Cloudflare's network. Vector databases as a sort of product category are definitely having a moment of, becoming very popular right now. Cloudflare pricing is really reasonable. It's very high performance and it's super flexible. And we think it's a really competitive and easy to use vector database that is great. In terms of what else is out there on the market, in my experience, Vectorize is one of the easier ones to use, which is awesome. So that's Vectorize. Sorry, my dog's barking outside of the studio room. So we also have AI Gateway. This is one we'll talk about in the final webinar of this series. This is basically a easy to use gateway for interacting with multiple AI providers from a single endpoint. So whether you want to use the OpenAI APIs for things like ChatGPT or GPT-4, you want to use like Hugging Face models or all kinds of other stuff, it will provide you with a single endpoint that you can use to access that, and you'll get all of the sort of benefits of Cloudflare's network, things like performance and being deployed around the world and all that kind of stuff for all of your AI integrations. So we'll be looking at that in the final webinar and how you can sort of augment existing AI applications with AI Gateway. Okay, so there's a bunch of other stuff that I'll say before I guess I get into the next section in this sort of like what tools or things do we have in the AI space that are things that we've already had in the past, things like Workers, which is our serverless platform, D1, which is our SQL database, Cloudflare Pages, which is our sort of static or front-end application deployment platform for deploying like your React applications and things like that. All of those are super useful in this world as well. You may imagine like I'm building a chatbot. I need to deploy my React application that's like my UI somewhere. You can use Cloudflare Pages for that. There are so many things in the developer ecosystem that you can check out. And you can find all of those at developers.cloudflare.com. So this list here is very kind of AI oriented, but it's very, very common for when I'm building AI applications, I might reach for D1 for actual like structured relational data storage using a SQL database. I might use R2 to store my fine-tuned models or to store like the output of an image generation in an R2 bucket. So there are so many other things to check out, and this is a very short list that's sort of oriented around AI. Okay, so I'll take a quick break for questions. Um, Will the endpoint API be compatible with this? This is the AI gateway endpoint, be compatible with LangChain or the OpenAI client? Yes. So one of the primary things that AI Gateway supports is the OpenAI APIs. And so you can kind of run this endpoint in front of your OpenAI deployment. We'll handle your API key as well for that, which is great. So it's a little bit more secure. And that also means that if you have a LangChain application where you may be pointing to OpenAI, you can set up the proxy URL and point to API Gateway. You'll also get things like usage statistics and things like that. So you can see actually how that endpoint is being used and stuff like that. So that's a really good question. You can go to developers.cloudflare.com and search for AI Gateway, and you can find the documentation there and kind of understand a bit more how it works. Though, like I said, we'll be talking about it in the final webinar of this series. Okay. So that's another question. I'm a full stack developer. Is it required to learn AI algorithms like linear regression? Definitely not. I don't even know what that is. I mean, I know I've heard that term before. I'm not like a math person, so it's very, very not required because I don't really know what that stuff is either. The focus of these workshops and of a lot of these tools that we have in the Cloudflare AI product suite is like how do we kind of simplify access to those models, things like Llama or Mistral or Stable Diffusion, and make them available to full stack developers like you or like myself. So if that's something that you find interesting, yeah, I mean, by all means, go and learn that stuff. I am not particularly passionate about that kind of stuff, so I don't find it interesting, but I like building things with all of these language models and stuff like that. Are these language models trained on different languages? That's a very good question. I'm assuming you mean like verbal languages. I don't actually know in great detail whether models like Llama or Mistral are trained on different languages. I can't speak to that. You are more than welcome to go to ai.cloudflare.com and try and see what happens if you say like, respond in Spanish or whatever. I'm not actually sure. That's a good question. I will go look that up myself after this. I'm not 100% sure on that. Okay. Um, so a lot of questions. So I'm going to leave some of these, and we'll kind of get through them as best we can over the course of the webinar. By the way, if I do not answer your question live, I'll have a contact slide at the end of this again. You'll be able to message me on Twitter or send me an email. So I'll do one more question. Does AI Gateway support integration with Cloudflare Zero Trust access for use with self-hosted models, likely through Cloudflare tunnels? That's a very good question. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to go look. I know that, and maybe you're already doing this. I actually just was exploring this myself yesterday, so it's funny you bring this up. Using self-hosted models and providing access through Cloudflare tunnels. That part of it I know for sure works because I've done it. But does AI Gateway support integration with those? I'm not 100% sure. So you may want to go check out the AI Gateway documentation, like if you can pass a custom URL. I'm not 100% sure about that. That's a good question. Okay, I will leave I'll just follow up real quick on one of these. In regards to different languages, a couple of people said yes, they are trained on different languages. Someone said yes, it responds in Spanish as well, but better to ask, please respond to me in Spanish. So that's interesting. Pretty cool. Okay. Thanks for the questions. Please feel free to keep asking them. I'll try and get through them, as many of them as I can as time goes on. But let's move into the actual content here. Oh yeah, wow, I read my own mind. So again, this is another contact thing. So DM me on Twitter at ChristianF_, or email Christian@cloudflare.com. I read my own mind ahead of time. I knew that people would have questions right about here. Okay, so let's get into the actual dive into some of these terms. So models, embeddings, vector databases, what does all this stuff mean? These are Christian definitions. These are not like, I don't know, school definitions, like research paper definitions. This is like my mental model of how I think about things. So if I define something in a way where you're like, well, that's not 100% right, please feel free to let me know. Again, you won't hurt my feelings. These are like how I have kind of reasoned about them in my head in order to be able to build stuff with them. So we'll talk about models first. AI models are different algorithms that perform different tasks. It's really a generic explanation. Some of them are made with things like this question that someone asked about, like linear regression and things like that. There's a lot of mathy stuff that goes on to make these work. But to me, they're essentially different algorithms that take in some input and provide some output using an algorithm to sort of derive useful or interesting output based on it. So just to give you an example, that if you're not super familiar with models themselves, you're not like a nerd about like this model came out yesterday and it performs this but much better than a different model. So you can think of ChatGPT, which most people are probably familiar with at this point. ChatGPT is an interface to a bunch of lower level GPT models that OpenAI has made available. So 3.5, GPT-4, GPT-4 Turbo, GPT for Vision. I think it's just like, yeah, Vision. There's a bunch of these different models, and each of them are essentially tasked with receiving some input. And then inside of that, there's a lot of, a lot of kind of mathy sort of stuff to determine some sort of useful output. So in Workers AI, this is the longer list I told you I would talk about back based on a previous slide. We have a ton of different model categories. And I imagine that this list, we keep adding new models all the time. I imagine this list will continue to get more interesting. Um, so some of my favorites here of this list, automatic speech recognition is super useful. As someone who does a lot of video, having access to the Whisper model, which is one of the better speech recognition models out there, right in Workers AI, allows me to do things like transcribe audio and get a text version of it or things like that. We also have image and text classification. So you can send an image up to Workers AI and say, is this a banana or not? And it'll be able to say with some confidence, yes, this is a banana, or like, no, you're a person, you're not a banana. Text to image is what I was talking about earlier. I would kind of simplify this to say it's image generation. And this is done with the Stable Diffusion model, where basically you can say, and I'll show you some examples of this later, generate a coloring book page of a corgi running through a field, and it will take that text and it will generate an image based on it. Text embeddings we will look at in great detail today. And I won't even get into it right now because we're going to look at it here shortly. Text generation is probably the most, at least for full stack developers like myself, the most exciting. That is the Llama model, Mistral, all of these sort of GPT-like stuff where we can say, ask it a question and get a response back. We can ask it to take some text like a blog post we've written or something and rewrite it in a different tone. All that stuff happens using the text generation models. And then finally, translation as well. So lots of interesting models here. Again, developers.cloudflare.com to check out the documentation. We have in-depth docs for each of these models if you want to understand like what's the specific model we're using, what sort of limitations does it have in terms of how much information can you send it and stuff like that. Okay, so I'm gonna have a couple code snippets here in the slides, though. Like I said, we will be live coding in the following webinars starting next week. So you will see all sorts of code. But for those of you who are developers and want to kind of understand what this stuff looks like, this is how you use Workers AI. So this is an example of using the Llama model. And you can see that it's in JavaScript. So this is deployed using Cloudflare Workers. We also do have a REST API for all this stuff. So you can go to api.cloudflare.com and you can see how you might just call this using whatever programming language you want to use. in whatever HTTP library you want to use. But this is the simple version using Cloudflare Workers. So we begin by instantiating a new instance of AI, which is this AI class that comes from the Workers AI NPM package. And then we set up a list of messages. So this is an array of messages. This is what's known as a scoped prompt, and we'll cover that in detail later if we have time, hopefully. But it's this idea that you have a collection of messages, and each of these has a role, which is system, user, or assistant. We'll talk about those later on. And the content, which is the actual content of the message. So here we have a system message where we say, you are a friendly assistant. So sort of setting some context for the language model. And then a user, which is me as a user of this language model asking, what is the origin of the phrase hello world? So with those messages, we then call AI.run. And the first argument that we pass in here is the name of the model. So this is Llama 2 7B chat int 8. So you can get a list of what those models are in our docs. This is probably the most sort of straightforward text generation model we have, which is a Llama 2 model. And then we pass in the messages here in the second argument to say, basically, this is what I want you to generate text based on. So, and then the response, I guess, oh, there we go. I was missing a scroll. I was like, I feel like I added the response here. So then what we'll get back here is this text. The origin of the phrase hello world is not well documented, but it is believed ... And it would generate more stuff here. For the purposes of the slide, I just wanted to kind of shorten it. So basically, we give it some list of messages. You can also just give it a straight up like string. This is like an unscoped prompt, which we'll also look at later on. But in this instance, we can sort of set some ground rules. So you are a friendly assistant. You could say like you are a pirate and it'll answer as a pirate or whatever. But this kind of sets up to the system, which is the model itself, what sort of things, ground rules, ways of speaking, things like that. And then the user role, this is our actual query. There's also an assistant role, which we'll look at later on. So that's kind of how that works. Let's take a look at some questions here. Please use JavaScript or TypeScript while coding. I don't know if that's a question for me or whatever. This is JavaScript, so maybe you're talking to someone else. Is there a model for text categorization? We have a list of topics. Put this paragraph under the relevant topics. So there is a text classification. I don't, and I haven't used it too much, but I believe that it's more sentiment analysis. I'm not 100% sure on that, so you'll need to go look at the docs. And it would be like, is this positive or negative? I think is kind of how that works. Um, but I believe that you could probably use text generation for this, where you could give it a list of what those topics are and basically say, put this inside of one of those topics. You might have to refine it a little bit. I don't know if we have a specific, and I may be totally wrong about this because the list of models changes often. So definitely go look at the docs. Off the top of my head, I don't believe that's what text classification, as I understand it, in our sort of model suite does, but I may be wrong. So that's just my experience with working with it. I believe it's more like sentiment analysis. Only available for JavaScript. Will it support Go, Python, or Rust? So there is a REST API for all of this stuff. So api.cloudflare.com. I think you can also go to the Workers AI docs, and there's a link in the sidebar to go specifically to the AI endpoints. So it's definitely any language you want to use, and you just use the REST API directly. This SDK specifically is JavaScript oriented, but there is a REST API. We'll look later at streaming, how to get streaming responses from this. The one thing I'll say is that we have some stuff here in the SDK for handling streaming. I don't know as much about how to handle that stuff in like Go or Rust or Python for that matter, because I'm not experienced in those languages really. So good question though. Let's see. Da, 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 da. Okay, I think there's like two questions here that are sort of the same. and I don't have a great answer for them, but I will just kind of cover them. For AI Gateway specifically, there's questions about, will you support this provider or custom endpoints and stuff. I can't speak to like the product direction of that because uh, I'm not on that team. But definitely let us know. One thing that I will mention that is worth checking out and giving us sort of feedback on is in our Discord. So I think if you go to, shoot, what is the URL? I'll have to go look it up and we have a sec, like during questions or whatever. But we do have a Discord server. You could also just search like Cloudflare Discord and probably find a link to it. And you can definitely give us feature requests and stuff there as well. So if you want to kind of reach that team specifically and say, hey, will you support this provider or whatever, that would be a good place to do that. Thanks for all the questions. These are great. Let's move on to I think to embeddings. I guess one thing I'll say just to summarize the model section here, this ecosystem of models is changing all the time. I know I kind of at a high level follow what are the models, particularly around like text generation and stuff that come out all the time. And I would say we do a pretty good job of being able to stay on top of things like, for instance, Mistral was a version of Llama that is sort of fine-tuned to be better for kind of like conversational tasks. And it is, I believe, in a lot of testing and stuff that people have done, benchmarking and things like that. It's like roughly equivalent to GPT 3.5. It's not quite GPT-4 level, which I would say is probably best in class. But it's very good, and that's just my personal opinion. To be quite honest with you, GPT-4 is definitely like the gold standard for this stuff. But it's I mean, the landscape is just changing so quickly, and there's new models like probably every day, honestly, if not every week. And so definitely keep an eye out in our docs as we launch new models. We also tend to write blog posts and announce them and stuff like that. So it's a really exciting space that's changing a lot right now, which is cool. Okay, let's move on to embeddings. This is probably the closest to sort of math stuff that we're going to get into today. Though I myself am not really much of a math guy, and so I hope I can explain it in a sort of simple way that does not confuse people and actually helps demystify how this stuff works. Because I didn't really understand it, and then I found that when I started building stuff with it, I maybe got just the right amount of understanding to know how to debug and build stuff with it, but not so much that I entered like full like math guy territory because that's like out of my depth. So embeddings essentially measure how similar strings are, and strings here actually is maybe not the best way to put it. It could be any kind of data. You could, in theory, use it to measure the similarity of images or stuff like that. Let's say more, it measures how similar pieces of data are to each other. And we'll look at what that actually means here in a second. We use some models in Workers AI, the BAAI models, which are available from Hugging Face. And you can see in our Workers AI docs, we have a couple different variations of them. But this is what we'll use. And all of the examples that I will talk about here in the slides are sort of derived from how those models work, though there's a lot of different ones. So, I mean, you can get very, very small models that would work on like an iPhone, basically. You can get really big ones that are like super specific and would need to be crunched on like a big computer. But there's a variety of these models. They all kind of tackle this idea of embeddings. So this image I'll just kind of show you to start, and then I'll kind of break down why this matters and why it's important. This is an idea of like kind of graphing different words inside of this chart to represent embeddings. You can see that some concepts here end up kind of being close to each other. So things like refrigerator, oven, LG, these all kind of end up in this top quadrant here. So like high on the y-axis and sort of middle on the x-axis. Things like charger, battery, saw, drill. These are way over on the right-hand side of the x-axis, but in the middle of the y-axis. And it's this idea that things that are similar, words, conceptual, topics, whatever, should kind of be by each other in this chart. And so I'll show you like an example of kind of first look at it in code and then break down kind of how it works here. So in AI or in this example, we set up an AI instance just like we did in the last one. But now we have this collection of stories. So this first one is this is a story about an orange cloud. This is a story about a llama, and this is a story about a hugging emoji. And then what we do is we call this AI.run using this embeddings model. So this is the BAAI/BGE base. So I think there's a small and there's a large. There's a couple different sizes here, but the base one tends to be pretty good and pretty performant. And then what we do is we pass this text. So basically, I think to explain why these embeddings matter or why they're interesting, let's look at these three stories here. So, or these three, let's call them pieces of text for now, right? So we have three different items. And to start, we can see they all start with this is a story. So as a sort of concept, if you were to go back and map these inside of this, this sort of chart of embeddings, well, we all know that they're stories, right? So that part of it is similar, but what the stories are about, it was an orange cloud, it's a llama, it's a hugging emoji. These are actually very different topics. And so what embeddings do and these models that generate embeddings is it takes information inside of this string, inside of could be like a paragraph, it could be an image represented as like a piece of data, it could be anything. And what it does is it provides a consistent way to sort of transform this into something where we can say, is this similar to something else that's similar to it, or maybe not similar to it? We can have another piece of text here that's like, my name is Christian and I live in Texas, right? And that as a string is very, very different from these other three. And so that's kind of the high level of why we care about embeddings. So what does it actually look like? So we generate these embeddings, right? We say, here are these stories. I'm going to pass in this text. What do they actually look like? Well, basically what we get back is two different things. So we get a shape here, and a shape is a description of the vector size. So we'll explain what a vector is shortly. And then the data, which is the actual list of vectors representing the data. So essentially, we take one of those stories, this is a story about an orange cloud. And what we get back from the embedding model is a shape that says this is, it's one item and it's 768 vectors long. So this data here will be a array of these numbers. There'll be 768 of them. And so depending on the model you use and depending on how you configure it, you can get different lengths of data. So you can get more vectors, you can get less vectors, but it'll always kind of look like this. And embeddings are really just, or at least a large part of what they're comprised of, is this idea of what's called a vector. This is again, not a math guy, Christian explanation coming. Is a numerical coordinate indicating position along an axis. So in a lot of these applications of vectors in AI and machine learning, these vectors are generally floats between some set range. So for instance, 0 and 1. So if we go back here and look at this shape, you can see this is a list of floats. So 0.0319, et cetera, 0.006, 0.02. And that is a list of vectors that represent the data. So each of these stories would get one of those big lists of vectors. And then in theory, if we were to sort of like, rip open the model and kind of look on the inside and be able to generate a chart, we would see that these vectors, they would get plotted in, if they're similar, in a similar sort of space along this chart. So like I said, that's probably the most math we're going to get it into here. But that's kind of what the vectors look like and how they sort of work in addition to finding similarity and stuff like that. Right. So there's this idea that vectors indicate similarity. Okay. So if we take a story, this is a story about an orange cloud, and then a second string, this is a story about a llama, and we generate vectors for those, we would find that although it'd be a really, complicated math problem for us to do by hand, we would find that these two pieces of data have vectors that are way closer to each other on average than if we took, this is a story about an orange cloud, and my name is Christian and I live in Texas. The vectors for those would be farther apart. And so we can use those vectors to indicate whether things are similar to each other. So that's kind of what we have again represented here, right? So these have vector values that are significantly closer to each other than this chunk over here, which is more focused on like power tools and stuff like that. So this is like the power tool vector section. This is the bathroom vector section, etc. So how do we actually use these vector values in an interesting way? So this is where we get into vector databases. So vector databases take those embeddings, so those like kind of lists of super long vectors, and it allows them to quickly retrieve them and process them for similarity. So for instance, this is an example of what this might look like. So we have an item here in a vector database, which has some values, right? This is a really short version. This is like 3 vectors. So I've stored those 3 vectors, and I've also stored an ID inside of it, which I'll talk about here shortly. But basically, the idea is that we can use, we can use the vector database to help us identify and store similar vectors to each other. So I'm going to just kind of jump back. I should have formatted these slides slightly differently. But let's say that for each of these stories, we took them and we put them in a database. So this is story number 1, this is story number 2, and this is story number 3. And then I also put in one that's like that text I keep using. My name is Christian and I live in Texas, right? So if I then wanted to go back and find, which of these is most similar to each other, I could go do a lot of slide hopping here. For each of these stories inside of my vector database, I can store the ID, so story ID of 1, 2, 3, etc. And I can provide the values of the vector of that data. Then what I can do is when I actually get those vectors back, I can retrieve their associated data there, right? So I can say something like, I want to find all similar stories that match or are similar to the vector of story 1. So we may find that story 2, which is about, I think it was a hugging face, or story 3, which is about a llama. These are the most similar things to that first story, which is about an orange cloud. And so in Vectorize, which is our vector database, you have the ability to do similarity searches and things like that. And you can think of it as just finding which of these sets of vectors are the most similar to my current piece of data. Not a thing that you would probably want to compute by hand, and the vector database has very efficient algorithms for doing that. So once you have that information, like what are these vector IDs, you could come back and you can get that stuff from a database. So maybe I'll say like select from items where ID is in this vector IDs. This is like pseudocode, so I don't think this is exactly right SQL, but it kind of gets across the point. And then you can get those records back from whatever your database is. So you can think of it as I generate vectors for all my different items. I give them an ID, and then I put them in a database. Then later on, when I need to get them back, I can go and use the ID that's stored alongside the vector here to get the full representation of the data. So we're going to actually look at this exact use case later on next week. This is retrieval augmented generation. Essentially, what I just showed you is like the very simplified version of this, which is a really interesting and cool use case for making large language models work much better than they do by default. So let me show you an example. Actually, let me summarize one more time, and then I'll show you the example here. So first, we'll take, say, our stories, for instance, and we'll store them in a relational database. Cloudflare D1 is great for this. Then we'll generate those vectors for those database records. Put them, that would be Workers AI, not Vectorize. But then what we'll do is we'll store them inside of Vectorize. And when a new query comes in, We'll also generate vectors for that query. I'll show you an example of this in a second. Another example using the Workers AI embedding model, and then look up similar known vectors to the query using a vector database such as Vectorize, and then get a list of relevant records in the database using Cloudflare D1, where you'll finally augment your query with the relevant information. Let me show you what that actually looks like. So if I go into Llama 2 using Workers AI and I say, who won the 2023 NBA championship? Uh, I'm a basketball guy, so I'm going to use basketball examples probably through this entire series of workshops. Just prepare yourself. So if I ask the model that question, it would say, I don't have access to that information as my cutoff date for information is blah, blah, blah. It'll say something along these lines. Most of your language models have a cutoff date where there's just stuff they don't know beyond that, right? You could use this in a couple, 4 or 5 months, 6 months. You could say who won the 2024 NBA championships. And again, it won't know that information. So there is this, this information that the language model does not know. But with RAG projects, with retrieval augmented generation, what we can do is we can provide it information using vectors. So for instance, I may have a database where I put in a piece of information that says the Denver Nuggets won the 2023 NBA championship after defeating the Miami Heat in 4 of 5 games. So that's some piece of information I've put in a database. And now when I ask the question, who won the 2023 NBA championship? I can use a embeddings algorithm to generate the embeddings for the string. So who won the 2023 NBA championship? Then what I can also do is go look up and vectorize what information or vectors do we have that are similar to the vectors for this query. And you would guess, well, we'll look up here. It says 2023 NBA championship. It'll find this piece of information that has 2023 NBA championship in it. And it'll say, I think this is the most similar record or piece of data for your query. And then I can embed that as context inside of my query so that this time when I ask it who won the 2023 NBA championship, it could say the Denver Nuggets won the 2023 NBA championship. I could also say, who won the 2023 NBA championship? Answer is a Pirate. And it would probably be able to do that as well. The idea here is that we're providing additional context that helps you kind of, give the language model the information that it may not have, whether that is sort of temporal, like things that happened after its cutoff date, or it's things that are like sort of domain specific. Maybe you provide you work at a business, you have all your PDFs and stuff like that, and all your records. You want to provide it into the language model so you can ask things like, who is our most profitable client last year or something like that. And so you can kind of provide that information using the RAG model. Like I said, we'll cover this in a workshop next week. We are going to very ambitiously try and code all of it in an hour. And we'll use a lot of off-the-shelf cool tools for this, LangChain, Vectorize, Workers AI, and I think you'll find it really interesting. So definitely make sure to stop by next week for that. Okay, I'm going to take a break for questions. I want to try and get through this stuff real fast, but we only have 8 minutes left. So, yeah. In RAG, how big can the context be? Good question. So basically, it's dependent on the model, the language model, that is. We recently increased our context size for Llama. I don't remember off the top of my head of what that is, but if you go to blog.cloudflare.com, you can, you can get more information on that. This is a very common question, though, of context when it comes to RAG, because if you have a ton of information and you're stuffing it into the query, it makes it hard to actually, put back a bunch of information like as the response because you already are limited by context. So some solutions I've seen around this are that you could actually generate a summary of your information and then store that in in your records or use that to provide in the context. So say I put in a whole Wikipedia page about that NBA championship. Well, I could summarize that and have that be the part that I put as like the context or whatever into my query. So there's workarounds for it, but that's a really good question. So vector databases typically only map to IDs and are not used to store the documents themselves. That's a good question. We do have a metadata section. You could put stuff in there, but generally I would recommend that you keep it in a separate database because you probably want to be able to look them up and query them like for other purposes, right? So if you use D1 and it's a SQL database and you want to put these pieces like these pages or stories or whatever items, you want to probably be able to just actually query by ID sometimes as well, right? You don't want to always query through vectors and stuff like that. So I would recommend kind of keeping them separate and then using that ID to correlate them. It also makes it easier. You can just quickly delete the vector and add a new one anytime that there's an update instead of having to like kind of tear down the entire object and bring it back up. Um, Okay. I think that's probably good for questions. There's a lot of questions. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have time to get to all of them. There's a contact link here at the end that you'll be able to check out. So I'm going to skip a couple of these actually. I'm going to skip custom prompts and overrides. But you can check out in the Workers AI docs, there's an idea that you can override some of the default tokens on some of these models to provide your own instruction. You can check out the Workers AI documentation for that. Real quickly, I'll address scoped prompts, which we've seen a little bit of. This is the idea that you can specify roles when the AI responds. There's system, which is basically defining kind of the personality of the AI. So earlier we had this you are a helpful assistant, which is a pretty generic one that a lot of people use when building these. User prompts or the user role in the scope prompt is where you can actually ask a question. So that's like who won the championship or what is Hello World or things like that. And then the assistant role is not always supported by all models, but it can be used to hint to the AI about how you might want the message to be output. For instance, if you're working with code or something like that or data, you might say, you know, write this as JSON or write this as a CSV or something like that. And that's what the assistant role can be used for. And in Workers AI, this is just like JSON, JavaScript object. If you're using the REST API, it would be you'd encode this as JSON. You have like an array of messages, and each of them has a role and content. And so, for instance, here I could say, you are a very funny comedian and you like emojis. That's the system prompt, right? That's instructions or guidance to the language model on how to do this. And then the user actual question or prompt is tell me a joke about Cloudflare. Well, I could get a response back there. And then I could come back and say, you are a serious assistant and you should never tell a joke. And then ask it, tell me a joke about Cloudflare. This idea that the system role kind of guides the output of what the language model comes up with. So that's an interesting and useful concept that there's a lot of stuff to explore there as well. The other thing I'll mention is hopefully really quickly, I literally have 3 minutes left, streaming versus blocked requests. Actually, I would say blocked responses here. That's a typo. But there's this idea that, especially when it comes to the text generation models, you may want to begin showing output as the model is generating it. So instead of waiting 10 seconds for it to come up with a response or however long. If you ask it to do like a really big complex task, it may take a lot of time. You can pass in the stream piece of data here. It's a Boolean stream true, and you'll get chunks of data back here. So where is New York? New York is located, et cetera, until ultimately it sends this done token. So that is supported in a lot of our models, particularly in the text generation ones, which can make for a better user experience as opposed to just waiting or being blocked for however long, right? 10 plus seconds, probably for more complex things where it's taking a long time to generate a lot of text. Okay, this is my last little section of slides here, and I think we're going to get through it on time. We should probably do a follow-up webinar on this, but I wanted to shout this out because this is very, very recent, literally in the last week, is the ability to do image generation or what are called text to image models in Workers AI. This is an example of one that you can generate using Ricky, my manager here at Cloudflare, who's on the developer advocate team with me. He generated or made a coloring book example that I'll link to actually in the slides you can check out. But it's this idea that you can generate images directly from text. So it's pretty cool. This what was the exact prompt for this? It was corgi running through a field or something like that. So it's pretty fun. There's a couple different examples you can check out here. So this is the one I used for the coloring book. It's Coloring Book Page Maker. This is Ricky's one you can go check out. I also saw this yesterday, I believe, from someone in our community that's very cool, art.aiphotoshoot.com. So shout out to them. It's super cool and allows you to generate art in a bunch of different styles. So you can add a query. It could be, corgi running through a field, and then you can do it in different styles of art. So like hyper realistic or like futuristic or watercolor, stuff like that. So all that stuff is now supported in Workers AI as well, which is pretty nifty. Okay, how many slides do I have left? Yeah, so I got like two more slides left. It's noon, so we're literally out of time. So I will just briefly cover this stuff. If you have questions, you can screenshot this page as well. And if you need to reach out to me, I'm Christian F _ on Twitter. And you can shoot me an email at christian@cloudflare.com. I know I literally see there's 28 questions that I didn't get a chance to answer. A lot of the ones around pricing that I saw, pricing, terms and conditions, stuff like that. I'm not there, honestly, the best person to answer that stuff. So you have to go check out the Workers AI page because I'm just not an expert on like terms and conditions or pricing stuff. And it's kind of out of scope for the webinar. So sorry if those were your questions. Yeah, you go on ai.cloudflare.com and check that stuff out. But any questions about implementation or things like that, if I got something wrong, I saw someone said that I didn't quite define vectors correctly, which does not surprise me. So thank you for that, helping me understand that better. And yeah, you can reach out. Anything else too. If you build something cool, let me know. I would like to see it. And then the last thing, come back next week on Thursday. We'll be looking at building applications with Workers AI and Llama. It's going to be lots of live coding next week. So we'll look at building an interesting chatbot using Llama, looking at how the API requests, how they work, how the SDK works, and we'll actually deploy something. So if you want to do some homework before that, if you don't have a Cloudflare account already, sign up for one and make sure to opt into the free Cloudflare Workers plan. You won't need to spend any money for any of this stuff. But if you want to do some homework before that, you can go and do that and have Node installed on your computer. So that's the only requirement there. On Friday, we'll look at a more complex example. We'll build a retrieval augmented generation app using Vectorize and Workers AI. So all of that fairly complex embeddings and vector database stuff. If you want to understand how that really works, as I said earlier, my thesis, I guess, is that the RAG application is kind of like a hello world for AI developers. You should really understand how to build that if you want to do like cool, complex stuff with language models and data and stuff like that. And I will show you how to do that. So definitely check that out. I believe that's my last slide. So there's more stuff too after that. The next week we have another webinar, and I'll talk about that next week as well. But thanks so much for tuning in. I think there's like 150 people here, so it was really exciting to see some of your questions, and hopefully you found it useful and interesting. And yeah, I'll see you next Thursday, and we'll also be reaching out with the recording, hopefully sometime soon, once we get it all, processed and stuff. So thanks so much, and I'll see you next week.